Welcome to Permission to Kick Ass, the show that gives you a virtual seat at the bar for the real conversations that happen between entrepreneurs. I'm interviewing all kinds of business owners, from those just a few years into freelancing to CEOs helming 9-figure companies. If you've ever worried that everyone else just seems to get it and you're missing something or messing things up, this show is for you. I'm your host, Angie Coley, and let's get to it. Hey, and welcome back to Permission to Kick Ass. With me today is my friend April Pertuis. Say hi, April.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Angie.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. For anybody that doesn't know, I was on April's show a while back. And April, well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, to keep it short and sweet, I help women tell their story. We are a storytelling company, coaching, training company where we help business leaders, entrepreneurs, female, badass, amazing humans really learn how to conquer their story so that they can get out there on bigger platforms and stages. We help them write their book, get on stage, launch podcast, and really just dominate their communications by way of learning how to tell their story. I'm a lifelong storytelling expert. Yes, I say lifelong because I feel like I've been doing this work since I was about 7 years old, but I've been doing it professionally my entire career. And my business name is LIGHTbeamers. And my tagline behind LIGHTbeamers is that when you share your story, you shine a light. I really do believe that storytelling is not just a soft skill. It's really something super powerful that everyone has in their back pocket and inside of them that they can use. And when you use it strategically and appropriately, it can absolutely shine a big light into the world, a positive light into the world.
Oh, absolutely. And like two things came up for me. One was the shine a light thing. Does that have anything to do with the Marianne Williamson quote?
You know, it originally, when I started LIGHTbeamers, it had nothing to do with the Marianne Williamson quote. However, since starting LIGHTbeamers, I've had LIGHTbeamers 9 years. I cannot tell you how many times people have sent that quote to me, which I super appreciate because it's a beautiful quote. It's really long. I can't quote it right now, but if you just Google Marianne Williamson and shine your light, you're going to find it. And it's really the perfect description of what I see about storytelling. So it's a great mirror. I am driven by faith and am guided by God, and Matthew 5 plays a big role. Matthew 5, right? Matthew 5, which, is be a light and a city on the hill, which I believe that, again, like we have that capability. It's a choice whether we choose that or not. And I'm just choosing it. And so it's a big part of the shine your light for me.
Mm-hmm. I loved that. It just seemed like such wonderful synchronicity to me because I remember when it kind of clicked for me that, if I'm holding a candle and you're holding a candle and mine is lit and yours is not, it actually does nothing to my flame to light yours. It does nothing to diminish my light. And in fact, it makes the room brighter for both of us having our lights lit, so to speak, now. So that's always just been such a beautiful, and LIGHTbeamer just brings such a wonderful visual to me. So that's really awesome.
I know. That's the whole idea. I want people to feel that when they hear about LIGHTbeamers and they see some of the work that our people are doing, out in the world, sharing their story.
That's so funny. And I love that you talked about being a lifelong storytelling expert. That is one of my earliest memories. And I think this is the first time I've told this story in probably decades. I taught myself to read at age 3 with Disney read-along books, if you remember those books on tape.
Those.
Oh, yes. I distinctly remember that the first word that I remembered was 3. And this is relevant, I promise. So I would listen to these books over and over and over again. I learned how to read. I memorized the entire story. And then I would be at preschool telling the entire thing with the embellishments and holding court on the playground. And I remember just being so thrilled. And granted, they weren't my story, but I loved that feeling of just being there, having the rapt audience of kindergartners around me, listening to me tell this story that somebody else wrote that I memorized, but I had to put the Angie spice on it. So yeah, I think I haven't thought about that in a long time. That's what came up when you mentioned lifelong storytelling.
I love that. Well, you and I come from, we met, we knew we were cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways. Yes. And I know that storytelling is something that has anchored both of us, and even sort of a little bit of our past and our early stages of our career. is quite similar. So I'm not surprised by that at all. When I think about, my story at 7 years old and maybe even earlier, but one of the big memories is as a kid, my bedroom, my mom had someone come in and build bookcases all on the wall. And there was like a nook that my twin size bed fit into. So it was like the bookcases were built in around my bed. And at night, and I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I still am to a degree. I mean, life at 50 looks a lot different than it does at 70 or at 7. So I don't find as much time to read, but I still love to read. But back in those days, I was reading, quality fiction, even at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. I mean, fiction really developed my love for storytelling. And I just think about all of those books sitting over me and hovering over me while I slept at night. And it was just like, by osmosis, these stories were coming in and seeping into my body. And then from there, my vehicle for expression of story at that time wasn't like you. I wasn't overly animated. I wasn't someone who would go out for the school play or anything like that. But I was a big writer, journaler. I just was constantly pouring stories into my journal. I was writing poetry. I wrote poetry a ton. And it was just the way that I got my feelings out was by, telling my story to the pages of my journal.
That's such an interesting, I've known from a little girl that I wanted to be a performer. And also I got the message from authority figures at an early age, not too long after that, that nobody wants that. Like, stop that. Stop attention seeking. You don't need to be hogging the spotlight, anything like that. So it's taken the last several years to really examine that and undo it and go, wait, but I do. I love being on stage. Being on stage is my happy place. Some people are terrified of getting up and giving a speech. Oh my gosh, I'm walking across the stage. I'm doing big full body gestures. I'm telling crazy stories, and I love it. And I don't really know what point I'm making with this other than, like, it's okay. If you love the stage, it's okay. If you don't want to be on the stage, it's okay. Either way, like, both the stories that you're telling yourself about who you are, like me saying I wasn't meant for stage when I was, and the stories that you're telling other people are super important. They're how we relate. They're how we learn. They're how we process stuff.
Yeah. And also, just right, what you're saying is, if I may, permission to kick ass, right? Like, this is your permission to kick ass. And absolutely. And, there are always kind of two stories going on in people, for sure. It's the story that we really are, the story of our true life experiences, our emotions, how we feel about things, how we process the reality, the real story. And then there's a different story that sometimes we believe or we catch on to or gets told to us and then we adopt. So you had the story of, I'm going to be a performer and I love to be on stage and this makes me so happy. And you had the other story that you adopted that said, oh, wait a second, you can't shine too bright. Can't take that light away from someone else, even though, as we know from Marianne Williamson, totally not it. You don't have that power. I'm sorry. You just do not have that power. So, but yeah, like we have these two different storylines going on. And that's part of, truly, like when I work with my clients, part of learning, helping them figure out how to tell their story is also helping them unwind another story that they've got going on that needs to be dissolved so that they can go and shine their light appropriately.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I wrote down power to take away light because that was a thought that I wanted to unpack and get a little bit more curious about, because I agree with you that, like, I can't take away someone else's light. And I've also been on the receiving end of someone.
But you were at choice. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all at choice, whether we want to admit the fact that we chose it or not, and that's hard because when we're little and we're younger and we don't have as much life experiences, that's why other people are so influential. Our parents, our figures in our life, our mentors who, and by and large, maybe many of them mean very well by their words. They don't know that they're even causing harm. But as we all know, anyone who's done any kind of personal development work, inner child work, we all are walking around with a wounded little child inside of us. And so those are the stories that we do have to unpack. So as a kid, even though you did have power, you didn't know it, you didn't know how to use it, you didn't know how to stand up for yourself, you didn't know how to speak for yourself in a lot of times. And so that's why those powers do, and those stories do end up having power over us. And I always say to my clients, once you learn to unwind the stories that are holding power over you, but you are still in control. Like, you do get to unwind that story. You still do have the power. It's just right now you've given that power to something else. And so once you learn to harness the power again, that's when truly your story can come out and emit itself in such a powerful way.
And it was the reason that one caught my attention, and why I found that so fascinating is it has also influenced me and my coaching style and how I work with my people. Because I've said it before, I refuse to be the reason that somebody gives up on themselves.
Exactly.
I've been on the receiving end of that too many times, of somebody that said, your dream is impossible. That's not a smart choice. Don't do that thing. I just worry about you. And it can all be from super high level, well-meaning, full of love. But like, I'm not here to take that. So if you bring your dreams to me, I'm going to treat that with so much love and care. I'm never going to tell you that what you're working on is not possible, or that you're not enough, or that you can't figure this out. I'm going to be over here cheering you on for as long as it takes to help you figure that shit out.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is the only way to be, in the profession that you and I hold of helping others. It's cheerleading should be like a top a top strategy for sure. Yeah.
That'll be a top skill. Hey, I used to be the kind of asshole that made fun of cheerleaders, and now I'm over here going, I'm a cheerleader too. Can I add that to my resume? Woohoo!
Absolutely.
So this is fascinating to me. Like, how did you get into this line of work?
So through a big, long, squiggly line.
Like most of us.
It just evolves as we do. I did study journalism and wanted to be a storyteller. And so I became a storyteller. I became a journalist and loved that work for a while. But I also realized that in journalism, and specifically the jobs that I held at the time, were in television news. So I was your nightly news reporter, anchor. And my job at the time was to bring you the bad news, right? My job was to tell you all that was wrong in the world. And I was, tasked with going out and interviewing the police and the accused criminals and, all the crazy stuff that was going on in the world. And man, I did not really enjoy that. That really weighed heavily on me during that time of my early stages of my career. So I kind of held in two hands this juxtaposition of like, I love what I do because I get to go out every single day and do something different. Every single day I'm telling a new story. Every single day I'm interviewing new people. Every single day I'm meeting and interviewing new people and discovering their story and getting to pull it out of them and, extract the story and put it together and package it up. From the creative side, I really enjoyed all of that. I'm a producer at heart. On the other hand, I was hearing a lot of really powerful stories, but my employer and the audience only wanted a piece of that story. So I often found myself wondering what would happen if we went back and did follow-up. And occasionally you would go into a follow-up story, but not very often. If we went and did a follow-up story, if we found that person after, they kind of their point in time where they'd probably just made a bad decision. And I mean, haven't we all made a bad decision? Maybe our bad decisions didn't warrant us getting arrested or accused of things. But at the end of the day, that's really just the human condition. Like we make bad decisions, we have failures, we make missteps. And I always wondered, what would it look like after that? To tell that story? What if those people have been redeemed? What if those people got their life together? What if and some of them do and some of them don't. But, what if? And we were never really telling the what if stories. And that got me really curious, and curiosity is huge, mark of a great storyteller. And I got really curious about what would it feel like if we were to tell more positive stories on the news station at night instead of focusing on all the negative ones. And there just wasn't a place for that. This was before social media. When I was the age and time frame that I'm referencing, social media did not exist. So years later, as I continued to make squiggly lines in my career, I worked for a time doing scripted television. I worked for, some big names like HGTV, Food Network, DIY, and all that kind of fun stuff. And it did a lot of scripted television, and that was fun for a bit, but it wasn't really storytelling. And so then another squiggly line kind of landed me in the land of doing digital storytelling for brands in the health and wellness space, in which I was allowed and tasked with telling transformational stories. So I was working for weight loss companies, and we were getting to tell awesome transformations of people who had undergone, big transformations in their health and wellness and how much better their life was. And we were doing stories around transformation, around financial gains and building teams. It was a lot in the network marketing industry. So you can imagine the types of stories we were telling for their conferences and things like that. And it was a lot of fun because we were actually getting to go and tell stories of transformation. And I did that work for a really long time and loved it. And it was great. But there became a point where I kind of started marrying those two things together. Like, what would it look like if we told more positive stories instead of the negative ones? So what if we could go and tell more stories like this, stories of transformation? And, it's not just these people that have them. You don't have to be winning an award for your company. You don't have to lose 100 pounds to be able to share a story of transformation. Every single one of us has stories of transformation in our life Rolodex.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, a lot of people aren't telling them, number one, because they don't know how. And number two, we haven't really given them a platform to do that, right? We don't have a TV channel that gives you open platform. Well, enter social media. That was really when I started to see the opportunity on social media, because social media, all the platforms that you might be on, are free open source media platforms. And coming from the background that I did, nobody got on the 10 o'clock news unless we got you there, right? Like, we had to go and invite you to be on. You didn't just get to choose to be on. With social media, you get to choose to be on and to share your story. But by and large, again, most people weren't doing it. And still to this day, by and large, most people aren't doing it. So that's when all the ideas started clicking. And I thought, I could do that. I can teach people. Not everyone's going to get sent me to their house to interview them, to pull their story out, to package it up nice and neat and put it on the channels for them. But I can teach people how to do that. I can really, empower them more by showing them all the nuts and guts of a good story and show them how to put it together. And then encourage them, be that cheerleader to say, go do it. Here's your open invitation. You don't have to wait for permission to kick ass. Go kick ass, right? And so that was really the impetus of LIGHTbeamers. That's when all the ideas came together. I'd love to tell you that, like Snap, I snapped my fingers and I built it overnight. But we've been doing this for 9 years, and it's taken 9 years, just bit by bit by bit to put different pieces into play. And we're just in a really good groove right now of really helping people tell their story for that reason. But that's really the squiggly line that got me here.
I love that you pointed that out, because it's super easy to look at where other people are, especially if they do something similar, right? And get into that comparison game. And I would say the same thing. The very first iteration of Permission to Kick Ass is probably 2017, 2018, somewhere in there, right? And I worked on it a little bit when I was working full time with a big name clients, and it wasn't really the serious thing. And then, later on I added the book and I added the podcast, and then I stopped sending my newsletter. And it's all been a little bit at a time, instead of I just sat down one week and banged out the perfect site and now I've got all my shit figured out. Like, it doesn't work that way.
It does not work that way.
That ties back to something beautiful that you said about curiosity, which I think is a superpower, not just in storytelling, but in entrepreneurship, right? Because if we come to a problem deciding that we already know what the solution is, we might miss something that's even more incredible. We might miss an even better opportunity if we've already set our sights on, like, nope, I already know how to fix this. Well, what if I tried something different? What if I had a little experiment right now and we just saw how it went, and if it flops, okay, well, that's how some experiments go, right? It's easier said than done, obviously, but
yeah, that's one of the greatest questions that I think people can ask in order to kind of spark their curiosity. If you're not naturally curious by nature. Curiosity, honestly, just like storytelling, is a skill. It can be sharpened. It can be worked on. So just, put a sticky note on your computer or at your desk, or put it on your phone and set an alarm. And just ask yourself periodically, what might it look like if? What might blank look like if blank, right? And insert some blanks and play and get curious. And then that will sharpen that curiosity muscle. And it will help you start, like you said, problem solve in a different way, come up with creative ideas and solutions. And, the whole idea of LIGHTbeamers, and the reason I'm still here 9 years later, is because of curiosity. It really was a time and a season, literally about 10 years ago, right before I started LIGHTbeamers, I was in a state of what would it look like if? And my blanks were, what would my career look like if I wasn't reliant on my current clients for a paycheck? And I said, what would it look like? What would my career, what would my work look like if I could if I could really create it from a space of like pure imagination, right? Like if I could just take, if I'm operating at a 9 or a 10 right now, because at that point I was pretty good at what I did. I didn't need another skill. I didn't need to go get a certification. I had been doing this work for about 23 years or so. I was pretty good. And I had fantastic clients, and I loved the work that I was doing. Yet, if those clients went away, I still wasn't in control of being able to create on my own. I was still reliant on, those companies calling me and saying, "Hey, we want you to do these videos," and da 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 da. And I thought, man, what would it look like if all that went away? Then what would I do? And it's like, well, you would have to get creative on your own. Okay, great. What would that look like? Well, you could, go deeper into storytelling. Well, great. What would that look like? And I just kept following the questions around what would that look like? And I just was in a state of curiosity and a state of wanting to figure out how could I exist truly at my highest level, be of pure service to the world, like to be really living on purpose. Like, okay, God, you designed me this way. You designed me to be super curious. You designed me to be a great storyteller. You designed me to do this work. I have no intentions of necessarily abandoning this. Some people make giant pivots in their career. That wasn't me. I didn't want to make a career pivot. I wanted to make a career elevation. And that's what I was getting curious about. And at the time when I first started answering these questions, the idea of LIGHTbeamers and all that we have today was even remotely on the radar. I couldn't see any of it, and all I saw in the beginning was, okay, we have an open source media platform called social media, and people are using it all wrong. So why don't I just get on there and start showing them how to use it right? And that was my own opinion, right? So I started there. That's where I started, and I just kept being curious. So ask yourself that question and repeat. What would it look like if? What would it blank look like if blank? And you got to start filling in the blanks and getting curious. And man, that's going to be your permission to kick ass right there. I promise you.
Oh, yes. I love that. Well, and a couple of other things that I wrote down, right? Sometimes when you notice something, it's really easy to dismiss as like, well, I'm probably the only one, or how important is this really? But I love the fact that you wrote that there was no place for positive stories on the media, world that you came from. And that right there is enough for you to experiment with, for you to get curious about, okay, well, there's not enough positive stories. And I love being able to tell stories. I love being able to talk to people, exactly like you said. And I'm just tired of talking about these horrible things without any kind of resolution. What if there was a place where we could tell positive stories? And look how that led to the development of such an awesome thing. And I also, if I haven't pointed it out before, I'm curious now as to like when you were in the television industry, because we might have accidentally like crossed paths a couple of times without knowing it. I was in the TV industry for a little while, and I wanted to be in TV development when I got my master's degree. And that didn't work out for, obviously we're here, and I've been a marketer for a long time, but I worked for CBS Films and Warner Brothers and TNT TBS and a lot of the big majors, and tried to break in for several years. So I guess you could say I always had those storytelling instincts too.
Oh, for sure you did. I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, look at what you do now, even in your marketing work and as a copywriter, you're helping your clients tell their story, for sure. And even just like, you said at the beginning, or maybe as before we got recording, I can't remember, but you were like, we're here to hold space for, what needs to come forward. And if what comes forward isn't exactly it, like that, we take that out. I think you said this before we started recording. It's kind of like one of your rules of this podcast is that, you're here to help your client shine or your guests shine. And if something comes up in the conversation that might feel a little raw or inappropriate, you're not here for the salacious material. That's what I felt like I was being asked to do back in the day when I was working for CBS and I was telling those stories. Is I would come back to the newsroom and go, there's really this whole other story going on, but the news director was like, nope, we want that one thing. We want the sensational, we want the hyper, we want the gore, the gory details. If it bleeds, it leads, right? They wanted the blood and guts. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to the story besides the blood and guts. But I never in those days was granted permission to truly go and tell those stories. And that drove me crazy. And quite honestly, it really drove me out of the business because I developed, and I have my own battles with anxiety for different reasons, but I'm not naturally bent that way. And I was coming home from my work in those days, and I felt like there was an 800-pound elephant sitting on my chest. And I would walk around the house. I was newly married to my husband, and I would come home. We had this teeny tiny apartment, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and working for CBS News. And I would just heave, like, it would take me about 30 of those to finally release the day. And I didn't have language back then, late 20s, early 30s about this, but now I know that I am deeply empathetic. And what was happening is I was going and interviewing all these people and getting their stories, and I would connect so deeply with them, with what they were feeling. And I would feel those feelings alongside with them. And I didn't know how to energetically release those stories from my body. And it caused a major, crash. And that was really the thing that got me to leave. It was the thing that was like, I don't know how I can keep doing this. I want to keep doing people's stories. I want to keep staying in storytelling, but I cannot stay here because I'm going to die. Like this is not good. And that was really the thing that sent me out. But then from that's the place that I got curious and said, well, how could I keep telling stories if I wasn't working in news? And that's how I made my way to HGTV, and then got over there and wasn't really doing that great storytelling. So then I got curious again. Well, how could I do this? Work for programming and scripted television and do some other things, but have it be more storytelling based. And that's what led me to doing more producing for brands that actually wanted that. So literally you got to understand like that path, like we talked about earlier, it was definitely a squiggly line, but going back to what we talked about earlier, it was the curiosity piece that led me there. But it was really, if I'm really truthful, like back in those days doing those types of stories, like it was great, but man, that was the thing that drove me out of it too at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of sensational stuff too that can really distort it for everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Why should I tell this story when it's just going to be outshouted by the negative shit, or somebody with a much more impressive background is going to come up? And like I wrote down and underlined a couple of times, ordinary, extraordinary.
Yeah.
because that's particularly, you mentioned that I work with my clients and I have a VIP experience. This is not an advertisement. I'm trying to give context, but if you're interested, reach out. So I have an experience where I try and help my clients with their marketing by interviewing them to get their stories. And I think the best part about that is how they'll just talk about a day that they were frustrated, or a day that they were inspired, or a favorite client or something like that, and they'll get so animated. And I actually had it happen recently with one client. She's a human loneliness and connection expert, which is fascinating. She got really curious about mass shooters and what leads to that, and did a whole bunch of research. And it turns out it's a lot rooted in loneliness and disconnection and feeling like you don't have a place, right? It leads you to seek out connection anywhere, even if it's horrible connection, right? It warps everything. And she just didn't know how to talk about what she did, even though she knew she was really freaking awesome at what she did. She's given TED
And
Talks.
such important work, because look at our world. I mean, totally
Yes.
disconnected world and isolated world right now.
Yes. And I remember, like, I asked her one question. I don't even remember what it was, but she went off on a rant, and I just like sat back, nodded, said, yeah, okay. Yeah. Ooh, tell me more about that. Right. She ranted for a good 20, 30 minutes and immediately apologized and went, oh, I'm sorry. Like, that was a big tangent. And I went, never apologize for a tangent with me. That's where the gold is coming from. And here's where this matters, right? I send her the work, which was redoing her website in part. And I got to show her actually on one of the pages. I was like, remember that rant you apologized for? Here it is, nearly word for word, just organized into neat little bullet points right here on the page. And she was like, I said that? Oh my God. That is incredible. I said that? Yeah, you said that. And that ties back into my philosophy of, like, you don't have to be extraordinary. Often you just need the perspective of somebody else to show you just how awesome and ordinary, extraordinary you are, right? You can connect with people. One thing that I wrote down, I don't know if you've ever seen A Man Called Otto, which is a movie that came out a couple years ago.
Such a great book and movie. Yeah.
Talk about ordinary, extraordinary. This is a movie about an elderly man who has lost his spouse and is incredibly lonely. And he tries, here's your trigger warning. He tries several times to shuffle off this mortal coil. And every single time he is accidentally thwarted by the neighbors who need his help for something, or like something happens and he stops. And eventually he gives up on this idea of, I need to not be here anymore, and creates a wonderful relationship with them. And like, that's not I went out to save the world, we destroyed Manhattan fighting with the aliens type story. And it's so much more powerful to me than the world was saved from aliens and all of those other stories that we see out there. That one sticks with me.
I think that's the biggest thing that everyone should really listen to, because I think in our world today, especially our social media world, where the loudest and proudest and the ones with the most following and the ones with the biggest, giantest story gets recognized, right? Like, it goes back to, like, if you've climbed Kilimanjaro with one leg, you've got a big story. If you've conquered cancer 5 times, you've got a big story. So that leaves a lot of other people feeling, and this is really where I fell in my own category around storytelling, because I have had the liberty of and the pleasure of telling people's stories literally for the last 30 years. I've interviewed over 10,000 people in my career, and I've told a lot of stories, and a lot of them have been those big stories. But there's so many other ones that haven't been that a lot of people do judge themselves and say, well, my story is not big enough. One of the biggest reasons I hear from my clients why they're not telling their story, is because they say, well, my story wouldn't matter. My story isn't that interesting. My story isn't that important. My story is kind of boring. I haven't had anything happen to me that would, warrant me go and tell my story. Because in their minds, and even though, yes, I'm helping clients step on stages and write books, you still do not have to have one of those stories to be able to write a book, to deliver a talk, to use your social media to go and have an impact. It's the quiet stories. It's the everyday Janes and Joes, I call them. Those are the interesting stories. It's the people who just navigate the daily challenges. It's the people who, maybe never thought about climbing Kilimanjaro, but they get up and navigate, a chronic illness, just maybe chronic pain, or just, dealing with a sassy child. I mean, it's just like the day-to-day stuff, that we don't really realize those are actually the stories that are going to connect so much more with an audience, because guess who is also listening to those stories, has those same experiences going on in their house, right? These are the things that actually will create such more powerful connection with the audiences when you learn to tell the micro stories of your everyday life instead of the giant stories that you think you might not have. I mean, I have a hypothesis, though, that if we dig deep enough, if you've lived any time on this earth and you've got some blood pumping through your veins, there will come a time that you're going to have a big story. Everyone's got a story. Every single person has a story. And it is one that might be a little bit bigger than the everyday stuff. Most of the time, when someone is like, I don't have a story, my life is boring, nobody would be interested, chances are there is still a story there, but it's been shoved down because of just exactly what you talked about earlier. Oh, I can't tell that story. That story is too much. That story would take away a light from someone else. There's usually some reason behind some story they've been told, that they've buried that story in the back corner and recesses of their life, that they've almost forgotten about it. And what happens is we start to dig, and then eventually that story comes up, and then we realize, oh, there we go. That's a story that's still holding power over you. Now we get to do the great work of releasing that, untangling it, and then using it in a positive, powerful way. But, like there are those stories, trust me, they're hiding in everybody. But generally speaking, the most reasons why people don't embrace storytelling or think their story is worth sharing is because they do kind of feel like, well, I'm just kind of an ordinary person, like you said. And there's some extraordinary storytelling in the ordinary. Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, and you said that, I've heard that with clients before too, especially folks that are in the earlier stages of their business. Like, well, my story's not interesting. I haven't really accomplished anything.
I haven't made my $1 million yet.
Yeah. It breaks my heart that that person feels like they don't have anything to contribute. If that's you listening, stop breaking my heart. Stop it. You are special. You are one of almost 8 billion people. One. That is like miraculous. And like, think about it this way too, right? We're all inspired by big stories, especially people who have triumphed over incredible odds. And also, like the flip side of that coin is, how well do you relate to those extraordinary stories? There's a certain part of most people, I feel like, that listens to that person on stage who's made their millions, right? And goes, well, I just can't relate to that. I have no context or understanding. And this just doesn't, it's a great story, and I don't see how that reflects like in my personal life, right? So, and that's not to denigrate or anything. I want to make clear, I don't see a distinction between like, these are the extraordinary stories, these are the ordinary stories, and like one's better than the other. But I mean, if we're talking about getting out there and telling your story and giving yourself permission, allowing yourself to tell your story, isn't it better that you have a small story that relates to someone who suddenly feels seen on a deeply personal level than someone who's going, well, I mean, you're out there climbing Kilimanjaro and I'm at home with 3 kids trying to build a business. I don't get it.
It doesn't relate. Yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons when I have a program that we take and help people learn to, speak and share more, tell that story out in public and use speaking to grow their business. And that thing is, we're not looking for some gigantic motivational speech here. We are looking for the story that's truly going to allow you to connect with your audience on a deeper level. And like I said, everyone's got those types of stories. So you may not think see yourself as a speaker. I don't see myself as like a Tony Robbins or, a Brene Brown, but by golly, I know I can get out there and I can speak and I can share my stories and I can just be April, right? And when I do that and I agree to take up some space in this world, I give myself permission. Listen, every time I do that, my business grows. Every time, like it just happens. And so that is, everyone has that ability. And I agree. Like, we can't compare to the stories that of like these giants that are out there, because that is not usually where your audience really even is. And so the more you can be like even closer to your audience and be kind of just like them, but that's the gold that so many
Yes.
people are missing.
Yes, yes, yes. And you are so not the best, most objective observer of your stories, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of people know this about me by now, but they're also super surprised when I mention it that I spent several years on the road as a digital nomad. And the most common question I get was like, well, you didn't write about it. You really didn't share a whole lot. Like, I posted some Facebook pictures of different places I was exploring and different people that I was meeting, but I never wrote really in my emails about what I was doing or why or what I was learning. I didn't make a big production about it. And so that surprised people. And I would just tell people, I don't understand why people are so curious about this. I mean, to you, I'm a digital nomad and this is interesting and exciting. And to me, I'm moving into somebody else's Airbnb and working and doing the dishes. And I used to joke with people like, what kind of stories do you want from me? Like, hashtag doing the dishes, digital nomad life. Like, it's just my life. It doesn't feel all that new and exciting to me. But then I started to talk with people who would point out, right, perspective, outside my head, that would point out, well, like, I have so many questions though. How do you manage life on the road while you're doing this? What do you even do about like laundry? And I was like, oh, I got a great laundry story. I fell down the stairs and thought I was going to die from gangrene. Like, I hurt myself doing laundry, have a laundry. And then I started going, oh, okay. Oh, so I fell down the stairs. This is how I do laundry and manage laundry as a digital nomad. These are actually interesting and informative to people. And I never would have thought that if I stayed in my head and just kind of, and I turned off curiosity and I shut down this idea. Well, it's just my life. There's nothing useful here for people.
Well, and that's the thing about tapping into some stories that we all have that do fulfill some sort of like vicarious need from others. So the fact that you were traveling and you were running your business from afar and going to different countries and popping around and doing different things is a bit abnormal. It's not something that every American woman is doing currently, right? And so you sharing those stories allows other people to go, oh, well, I've always wondered what it would be like to travel around. I'm probably not going to do that because I'm at home raising the 3 kids right now. So that's kind of off the table. But while it's off the table, I'd love to hear more about Angie's story, because that I get to like live vicariously through you in that moment. And I think those are really like good. And you're right. It's very hard to see that when it's your own story, which is honestly like why, the work that you and I do is important, because we can be those sounding boards for people. We can interview them and kind of help them see like, oh, those are the curious points of your story that probably more people would want to know about. And then they go, really? They want to know about that? And you're like, yes, they do. Go talk about that story. And then, then they see we're right. But it's hard to see that sometimes. But a great thing to do then is just to talk to the people that are around you. Hey, what do you find interesting about my story? Like, the ones who really know you the best, right? You can just ask them. That's a great exercise to, ask your sister, ask your best friend, ask your neighbor, ask the person that you do volunteer shifts with every week, or whatever it is you're out doing. Maybe you have an assistant that works with you in your business. Ask them, hey, you know a little bit about me. You've heard me talk about some things. What do you find the most interesting thing about me that maybe you think our audience would want to know? So it's like, again, what would it look like if? So that's a way to tap into those stories and find them when you may not think that they're there, but they are there.
I know. You may not think that they're there, but like part of me feels called to issue a challenge. You know what? I'm going to issue a challenge. If you work with me, and April can choose to co-sign on this or not. If you work with me and I cannot find an interesting story that makes you go, oh, damn, that makes me sound really smart. Oh, that makes me sound really interesting. If I cannot find a story that you can tell about yourself, I'll give you your freaking money back.
Oh, heck yeah.
I know it's there.
That's an easy one.
I know it's there. And I love reflecting people's awesome back at that. And I know we're running up against time. I want to keep talking for like 2 more hours. Before before I ask you about your business, I have one curiosity question.
Yes, let's ask it.
You were a reporter. Is the reporter voice a thing that they train?
You know what's so funny is to this day, when I am on the phone and if I'm like leaving someone a message, my husband, if he's there with me, he's like, "You're using your TV voice," So funny. It is a bit ingrained. And yes, they do train on it, to be honest with you, because nobody talks like that. Nobody, right? We don't talk like that at all. And it was really funny when I was at my very, very first official job at a CBS station in Corpus Christi, Texas. Here I am, fresh out of journalism school. I had been a radio DJ kind of through school, but not really doing a lot of reports. I was just like slinging records and giving the weather reports at the top of the hour, that kind of thing. And I got the job and I had this really, because I'm from Texas originally, I had this really thick Texas accent at the time. And they needed me to get up to speed very quickly because this was the type of station that all new journalists start at, which means it was a revolving door of journalists getting their feet wet and then on to the next thing. So it was just constantly a revolving door. So here I was in fresh, and they're like, "Okay, we need to get you up to speed because we know you're going to be leaving soon for bigger and brighter things." So they didn't pay me very much money. It was pennies on the peanuts, let me tell you. I mean, even back then it was terrible. It was like $11,000 a year that I got paid to be a reporter for CBS affiliate in Corpus Christi, Texas, which was not enough to pay for anything. So total side story, but I took an extra job working at a bingo parlor on the weekends, and people would come into the bingo parlor and they would recognize me and they're like, "How do I know you?" And I'm like, "You do not know me. You do not know me."
Pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain.
Don't pay any attention to that.
Thank you for indulging me on that.
It was so funny, but they sent me to the station, invested in sending me to a voice coach. And that voice coach just beat it out of me, helped me get rid of the thick Texas accent. I still have a Texas accent, but it wasn't as country as I once sounded. Mm-hmm. And it really was about teaching this kind of methodical, very monotone, reporter style voice, but it's still in me. I can call it up when I need to, but they really do train on that.
Oh, that's funny. Like the monotone. Cause I always picture and the school bus overturned on the corner. More about that at 11.
Oh, so funny.
Oh goodness. Thank you for indulging me on that. I know that was a random question, but that makes me super happy. I love the
random questions.
So this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Tell us a little bit more where we can learn about you and LIGHTbeamers.
Well, another great place to come is you need to come over to our podcast, The Inside Story. As Angie said, she's been a guest on the show, so you need to look up her episode for sure. And the many other episodes that we have. I do teach a lot on storytelling for my solo episodes. And actually, as a lifelong storyteller, the podcast, the Inside Story podcast, has been a place for me to continue to extricate stories of my own. Like I get to kind of perform my own wizardry on myself, which is hard to do, but it's kind of fun and it's a good challenge. And that's actually why I started the podcast. Most people start a podcast, they're like, "I want to reach thousands of people." I'm like, no, I want to just figure out how to tell my own story because I should be good at that. And that was really why I started the show. And it's been so much fun to, we're now in our 4th year of production, and it's been great. And I love getting to interview other people. And, it's just a place that I love to talk about storytelling and teach storytelling and illustrate great storytelling in other people's stories as well. So come check that out. Number one, that's a free resource that you can binge on and learn a lot more about LIGHTbeamers. But all the rest of the juicy stuff that we offer can be found on our website at lightbeamers.com. You could be connected to our community. You can follow us on our social media channels. You can come connect with me. We have a great couple of free resources right there on the homepage that you can download to get started thinking about your own story. So I highly encourage you to do any of those things and come say hello if you do.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you again for being on the show. I'm going to have clickable links in the show notes so people can check you out as easily as possible. Highly, highly recommend that you go check April out. We are both big proponents of your story is amazing exactly as it is. We'll help you tell it in the best possible way. So go tell it already.
Go tell it. Yes, go tell it. Shine your light.
Yes, shine your light so that we can make this damn planet brighter. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate the hell out of you.
Thank you, my friend.
That's all for now. If you want to keep that kick-ass energy high, please take a minute to share this episode with someone that might need a high-octane dose of "you can do it." Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Permission to Kick-Ass podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you stream your podcasts. I'm your host, Angie Coley, and I'm here rooting for you. Thanks for listening, and let's go kick some ass.